She was a ghost in green scrubs, a master of self-effacement. He was the king of the operating room, a god in a sterile gown who saw her as nothing more than furniture that could pass a scalpel. But when a four-star general's life bled out on his table, the ghost was the only one who knew how to stop the bleeding, and the king was about to learn that the most dangerous people are the ones you never see coming. Now, let me take you inside the most critical 90 minutes at Metropolitan General. The air in Operating Room 3 was a familiar cocktail of antiseptic, ozone from the cauterizers, and the faint metallic tang of blood. It was an atmosphere Anya Sharma breathed more comfortably than the exhaust-choked air of the city outside. Here, in the cold blue-white light, there were rules, there was order. Cause and effect were immediate and undeniable. A clamp applied correctly stopped the flow of blood. A suture tied with precision closed a wound. There was a purity to it that she found nowhere else. She moved with an economy of motion that bordered on invisibility. Her tasks were performed before they were requested, the correct instrument appearing in the surgeon's hand as if by telekinesis. She was the room's regulating heartbeat, unnoticed until it stopped. And it never stopped. For 3 years at Metropolitan General, Anya had cultivated this quiet, flawless competence. It was her shield and her camouflage. Dr. Alistair Finch, chief of cardiothoracic surgery, preferred it that way. He operated under the brilliant glare of the overhead lights as if they were spotlights, and he required his supporting cast to remain in the shadows. He was a man sculpted from arrogance and expensive tailoring, his silvered hair perfectly coiffed even under a surgical cap. His voice, a smooth baritone that charmed donors and terrified residents, was the dominant sound in any room he entered. He saw Anya not as a colleague or even a person, but as a function, an extension of the instrument tray. He never used her name if he could avoid it, preferring a curt nurse or a pointed gesture. He mistook her silence for meekness, her efficiency for a lack of ambition. It was a comfortable, convenient miscalculation for him, and a dangerously inaccurate one. The day began like any other, with the low hum of the hospital waking up around them. A routine valve replacement was on the schedule, one of Finch's signature procedures. It was theater for him, a chance to hold court for the rotating cast of residents and medical students who watched from the periphery, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. Then the call came. The calm was shattered by a coded announcement over the intercom. Code Sierra, Trauma 1, ETA 5 minutes. Code Sierra, not a fire, not a mass casualty event. It meant something else entirely. It meant VIP. It meant secrecy and men in dark suits who did not smile. The surgical floor buzzed with a new energy, a nervous current of speculation. Anya felt the shift in the air before the double doors to the ambulance bay burst open. It was a familiar tension, a tightening in her gut that was muscle memory from another life. The low, rumbling frequency of impending crisis. She finished her preparations for the scheduled surgery, her hands steady, her mind already moving ahead, calculating possibilities. The entourage that swept through the emergency department was not the usual chaotic scrum of paramedics. This was a precise, military-style insertion. 6 men, all with the same haircut, the same stoic expression, and the same telltale bulge under the left side of their immaculate suits, formed a moving perimeter around a gurney. On the gurney, pale and still, lay a man in his late 60s. A field dressing, soaked crimson, was taped crudely to his chest. It was General Marcus Thorne. Even unconscious, hooked to a portable monitor that beeped a frantic, unstable rhythm, he radiated an aura of command. His face, etched with the lines of 1,000 difficult decisions, was a mask of gray. Dr. Finch strode out to meet them, his chest puffed out, transforming from surgeon to statesman. He loved the proximity to power. It validated his own sense of self-importance. "I'm Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief of Surgery," he announced, his voice resonating with manufactured authority. "I'll be handling this personally. Get him to the trauma bay. I want a full scan workup, stat." The lead security agent, a man with a jaw like a block of granite and eyes that missed nothing, stepped into his path. His name tag read, Colonel Miller. "Doctor, the general's security is our priority. My men will accompany him at all times. We have his complete medical file here." He held up a slim, hardened tablet. "It's encrypted. Finch's smile tightened. He was not used to being dictated to in his own hospital. Of course, Colonel, we'll provide the best care in the country. Anya watched from a distance, her gaze clinical and detached. She wasn't looking at the powerful men in their suits or the self-important surgeon. She was looking at the patient, the mechanism of injury, the placement of the field dressing, the modeling of the skin, the shallow, rapid rise and fall of his chest. Her mind was a silent computer processing data. The dressing was too high for a simple GSW to the torso. The discoloration suggested a blast injury, not a direct impact, a pressure wave. That meant internal damage far beyond the visible wound. The pre-op briefing was held in a small conference room adjacent to the surgical suite. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. Finch stood before a massive, high-definition screen displaying the general's scans. He pointed with a flourish, his words a performance for the assembled team and for Colonel Miller, who stood against the back wall like a statue, arms crossed. "As you can see," Finch began, his tone condescendingly academic, "we have a penetrating trauma to the upper left quadrant, a shrapnel wound, most likely. It's nicked the subclavian artery, which is the primary source of the bleeding. A tricky spot, but straightforward. We'll go in, clamp the artery, repair the vessel wall, and he'll be on the golf course in a month." He smiled, a man thoroughly pleased with his own diagnosis. He was simplifying, of course. Any surgery near the subclavian was fraught with risk. But in Finch's world, risk was just another opportunity to demonstrate his brilliance. Anya, standing in the back as was her custom, leaned forward slightly. Her eyes were narrowed, focused on a small, almost imperceptible shadow on the CT angiogram just below the clavicle, near the aortic arch. It was a ghost on the film, a faint gray smudge that 99 out of 100 people would have dismissed as an artifact of the scan. But Anya had seen that shadow before. In dusty, makeshift medical tents thousands of miles away. It wasn't an artifact. It was a sign of a microaneurysm, a weakening of the vessel wall caused by the unique physics of a close proximity concussive blast. The shrapnel wound was the obvious injury, the loud distraction. The shadow was the real killer, a silent time bomb waiting for a change in blood pressure. She held her silence for a full 10 seconds, weighing the consequences. Speaking up meant inviting Finch's wrath. It meant breaking her carefully constructed camouflage. But staying silent could mean a man dying on the table. Her training, the core of who she truly was, made the choice for her. There was no choice at all. "Dr. Finch," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room's sycophantic hush. Finch stopped mid-sentence, turning slowly. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Yes, nurse? Do you need to refill the coffee?" A few of the junior residents snickered nervously. Anya ignored the jibe. She kept her eyes on the screen. "Sir, on the CTA, slice 147, there appears to be a subtle dilation of the aortic root, consistent with barotrauma. If we clamp the subclavian, the resulting increase in proximal pressure could risk a rupture." The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Anya hadn't just spoken out of turn. She had committed heresy. She had publicly questioned the diagnosis of God himself. Finch stared at her. His face, which had been a mask of charming authority, slowly transformed. The charm evaporated, leaving behind something cold and ugly. He walked slowly toward the screen, feigning a close look at the spot she indicated. He squinted, then turned back to the room, a cruel, dismissive smirk playing on his lips. "An artifact, Nurse Sharma," he said, finally using her name but turning it into an insult. "A bit of digital noise. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but perhaps you should leave the complex diagnostics to those of us who went to medical school." His eyes scanned the faces of the residents, daring them to disagree. They all looked down, studying their shoes with intense interest. He turned his full attention back to Anya, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "You are a nurse. Your job is to anticipate which instrument I need and place it in my hand. That is all. Do not presume to offer your opinion on matters so far beyond your station ever again. Is that understood?" The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that crept up her neck. She felt every eye in the room on her, a weight of pity and scorn. But beneath the heat, a core of ice remained, the part of her forged in fire and chaos. She met his gaze, her own expression unreadable, a perfect mask of professional neutrality. "Yes, doctor," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Good." Finch clapped his hands together, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. The performance was back on. "Now, let's go save a life, shall we? Scrub in." As the team filed out, Anya remained for a moment, her eyes fixed on the gray smudge on the screen. It seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, a secret only she could see. Colonel Miller, who had not moved from his spot against the wall, watched her. His expression was impossible to read, but his eyes, for a fraction of a second, lingered on her with a flicker of something that might have been curiosity. Or perhaps, she thought, it was just her imagination. She was isolated. She was a victim of the hierarchy. But the patient was still the mission. She pushed the humiliation down, packed it away in a mental box, and walked toward the scrub sinks. The battle was not in the conference room. It was in the theater to come. The operating room was Finch's kingdom. The sterile field of blue drapes was his throne, the gleaming steel instruments his scepter. As he scrubbed in, he was already narrating the surgery, not for the benefit of the team, but for the historical record he was composing in his head. The story of how he, Alistair Finch, had saved the famous General Thorne. Anya moved through her own pre-op ritual with practiced silence. The methodical washing of hands and arms, the donning of the sterile gown and gloves. Each action was a small meditation, a way of centering herself, of pushing the noise of the world away until only the task at hand remained. The sting of Finch's words was a dull ache, but she refused to let it distract her. Emotion was a liability. The general was prepped and draped, a small island of exposed, iodine-painted skin in an ocean of blue fabric. The only sounds were the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator and the steady, if slightly too fast, beep of the cardiac monitor. Finch made the first incision with a surgeon's arrogance, a long, clean line that parted the skin with brutal elegance. "Scalpel," he'd said. Anya had placed it in his hand before the word was fully formed. Forceps. They were there. Suction. Already in place, she was a perfect machine, anticipating his every need, her movements, a fluid dance around his. For the first 20 minutes, the surgery proceeded exactly as Finch had predicted. It was a textbook procedure. He dissected through layers of muscle and fascia, his movements economical and precise. He was a gifted technician. Anya had never denied that. His hands were steady, his knowledge of anatomy encyclopedic. His fatal flaw wasn't in his hands, it was in his head. His pride made him blind. He exposed the subclavian artery, a thick, pulsing vessel deep within the chest cavity. The tear was visible, a ragged gash on the superior aspect, oozing dark venous blood. "See?" Finch said, his voice amplified by the mask, directed at the residents watching from the edge of the sterile field. "Just as I said, a simple lateral repair. We'll place a proximal and distal clamp, control the bleeding, and stitch it up. We'll be out of here in time for lunch." Anya felt a cold dread snake its way up her spine. He was going to do it. He was going to ignore her warning completely. She watched as the senior resident passed him the vascular clamps. Her eyes flickered from the clamps to the cardiac monitor. The general's blood pressure was stable for now, but artificially so, supported by drugs administered by the anesthesiologist. Not him either. Her mind raced, a frantic search for an ally in the room. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Chen, was competent but timid, terrified of Finch. The other nurses were too junior, too intimidated. The residents worshipped Finch, hanging on his every word. She was alone. "Clamps going on," Finch announced grandly. He placed the distal clamp first, then the proximal one, cinching it down on the artery, just centimeters from where it branched off the aorta. A cage of her own paranoia. Was she wrong? Had she imagined the shadow on the scan? For a terrifying moment, she doubted herself. Then the monitor screamed, a single, continuous, high-pitched tone that cut through the room like a blade. The steady beep, beep, beep of the general's heartbeat flatlined. On the screen, his blood pressure, which had been a stable 110/70, plummeted, 60/40, 40/20, then just a series of dashes. "He's in V-fib! Crashing, Dr. Chen shouted from behind the ether screen. What happened? Finch froze. His hands, which had been so steady and sure, hovered uselessly over the surgical field. His eyes were wide with disbelief and panic. What? I don't understand. The clamp is secure. There's a massive bleed somewhere, the resident exclaimed, his voice cracking. The suction canister, which had been slowly filling with a trickle of blood, was suddenly overflowing, a torrent of crimson pouring from the chest cavity. The surgical field was instantly obscured. Anya didn't need to see. She knew. The clamp had increased the pressure in the aortic root just as she had predicted. The weakened vessel wall, the little gray shadow, had given way. The time bomb had detonated. "Get me more suction, I can't see anything," Finch yelled, his voice shrill. The god had become a frightened man. He began blindly probing the wound with forceps, making things worse, tearing at tissue in a desperate, clumsy search for a source he couldn't find. "Paddles, charge to 200, Chen yelled. The resident grabbed the internal defibrillator paddles. "Clear!" The general's body jerked on the table. The flat line on the monitor blipped, then returned. "No response. Charge to 300. Clear." Another violent spasm. Nothing. "He's gone," Finch whispered, his voice hollow. He stepped back from the table, his hands dropping to his sides, defeated. Time of death. Anya moved. She didn't think. She acted. Years of training, of muscle memory drilled into her in the most unforgiving classrooms in the world, took over. She shoved a tray of instruments into the senior resident's chest, startling him. "Bag him," she ordered Chen, her voice a low, urgent command that was utterly alien to the quiet nurse they thought they knew. She rounded the table and stood opposite Finch. "Get out of the way," she said. It wasn't a request. Finch stared at her, his mouth agape. "What do you think you're doing, nurse? I called it. It's over." "I'm not letting him die today," she said, her voice like chips of ice. "It would look bad on my resume." The line was sardonic, absurd, and it hung in the air as she shouldered him aside. She plunged her hands into the bloody cavity, her fingers moving with a surgeon's knowledge, but a warrior's speed. She wasn't searching. She knew what she was looking for. Her fingers found the aorta, slick and hot. She slid them down to the root and felt it. A gaping, pulsing tear. "I need a number 7 aortic cross clamp and a 14-gauge catheter. Now!" Her voice cracked like a whip. The head scrub nurse, a veteran of 20 years, stared at her, stunned into inaction. Anya's head snapped up. She locked eyes with the nurse. "Do you want a dead general on your table? Get me the clamp." Shoulders tensed like an internal switch had been flipped. The nurse, jolted from her shock, turned and retrieved the instrument. Anya's left hand was already inside the chest, her thumb finding the tear and applying direct pressure, a desperate finger-in-the-dike maneuver. With her right hand, she took the clamp. "Suction, right here," she commanded, pointing with her chin. The resident, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe, complied instantly, clearing the blood just enough for her to see. What she was about to do was insane. A Hail Mary pass in the final second of the game. Clamping the aorta so high was incredibly dangerous, risking paralysis, stroke, a dozen other catastrophic outcomes. But the alternative was certain death. She applied the clamp. The torrent of blood slowed to a trickle. "Okay," she said, her voice calm, a bubble of pure focus in the chaos. "He's clamped. We have maybe 3 minutes before we cause irreversible ischemic damage. Maybe less." She looked at Chen. "Push 2 amps of epi and a gram of calcium chloride. Start a massive transfusion protocol. I want every unit of ONEG you have." Chen, who had been about to protest, simply nodded and went to work. There was a new authority in the room, and it wasn't coming from the chief of surgery, who was standing against the wall, pale and shaking, a ghost at his own funeral. "You," she said to the most junior nurse, "get a sterile Foley catheter, a 20-milliliter syringe, and a silk tie." The nurse scurried off. Anya was about to perform a procedure that wasn't in any civilian textbook. It was a piece of battlefield improvisation, a technique taught only to a select few who were expected to perform surgical miracles with nothing but a pocket knife and raw courage. A temporary intra-aortic shunt. The nurse returned with the supplies. Anya took them without looking. Her entire world had shrunk to the space inside the general's chest. Her hands moved with a preternatural grace and speed. She inserted the Foley catheter through the tear in the aorta, threading it past the clamp. "Inflate," she ordered. The nurse injected saline into the catheter's balloon, which expanded inside the aorta, creating a makeshift seal. It was a fragile, temporary fix, but it restored a trickle of blood flow to the brain and vital organs. The flat line on the monitor wavered. A single, weak beat appeared, then another, and another. A ragged, struggling rhythm, but it was a rhythm. A collective gasp went through the room. "He's back," Chen whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "Sinus tash, but he's back." Anya was not celebrating. The clock was still ticking. "I need a 6-0 proline suture." She began to stitch the tear in the aorta, her movements impossibly fast and precise in the cramped, bloody space. She wasn't using a standard running stitch. She was using something else, a complex, interlocking pattern designed to hold under extreme pressure, to distribute tension across the fragile, damaged tissue. It was called a sandpiper's stitch, a classified technique developed for operators wounded by IEDs in the field, a medical signal known only to those within a very small, very violent community. In the observation gallery above, behind the one-way glass, Colonel Miller, who had been watching the entire nightmare unfold, leaned forward. His face, previously a mask of stone, was now etched with dawning recognition. He had seen that stitch before. Anya finished the last suture. The repair was ugly, a Frankenstein's monster of a closure, but it was holding. She deflated the Foley balloon and carefully removed the catheter. She took a deep breath. "Releasing the cross clamp," she announced. Slowly. She eased the pressure on the clamp, her eyes glued to the monitor. The blood pressure, which had been hovering at a perilous 70 systolic, began to climb. 80, 90. It settled at a weak but viable 105/60. The ragged rhythm smoothed out into a steady, regular beat. The room was silent, save for the now reassuring beep of the monitor. They had been on the brink of disaster, seconds from calling a time of death. Now, the patient was stable. The bleeding had stopped. A miracle had occurred. Anya felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, so profound it was a physical blow. Her adrenaline-fueled focus receded, leaving behind an aching weariness. Her hands were shaking. She took a step back from the table, her part in the drama over. She looked at the stunned faces around her, the residents, the nurses, Dr. Chen. They were all staring at her as if she had just grown a second head. Then she looked at Dr. Alistair Finch. He was still pressed against the wall, his face the color of ash. His eyes held a toxic cocktail of fury, humiliation, and raw, undiluted fear. He knew in that moment that he was ruined. He just didn't know how badly yet. Anya turned to him. She picked up a clean lap sponge and wiped her gloved hands. Her voice was quiet again, the nurse returning, but the authority lingered, an echo in the silent room. "He's stable," she said. "You can close, doctor." She handed him a forceps. The simple act was a devastating transfer of power. She had saved the patient, saved his career, saved the hospital from a catastrophic lawsuit, and in return she was handing him back the reins, allowing him to finish, to pretend he had been in control all along. It was a gesture of profound contempt, disguised as professional courtesy. He took the instrument, his hand trembling slightly. Anya turned and walked out of the operating room, peeling off her gloves and mask as she went. She didn't look back. The intensive care unit was a world of hushed whispers and the soft symphony of medical machinery. Each glass-walled room was a small stage where a life hung in the balance. In the largest room, at the end of the hall, General Thorne lay amidst a web of tubes and wires. Two of Colonel Miller's men stood guard outside the door, their presence a silent, intimidating declaration of the patient's importance. Anya was finishing her shift, the long, grueling hours catching up to her. She was documenting the events of the surgery in the nursing station computer, her words precise and clinical, betraying none of the chaos or the drama. She described the aortic rupture as an unexpected intraoperative complication, and her own intervention as assistance rendered under the direction of the attending surgeon. It was a lie, a professional fiction, but it was the path of least resistance. She wanted nothing more than to go home, stand under a hot shower for an hour, and forget the entire day. Dr. Finch had already begun his campaign of revisionist history. He had emerged from the OR, his composure restored, and briefed the hospital administrator and a nervous-looking press liaison. Anya had overheard him in the hallway, his smooth baritone once again in full effect. He spoke of a uniquely challenging case, a one-in-a-million complication, and praised the heroic efforts of his entire team in pulling the general back from the brink. He never mentioned her name. He was building a narrative, a human shield made of silence and authority, and she was being erased from it. He would bury her to save himself. She knew it was coming. A formal reprimand for insubordination, for overstepping her bounds. A quiet dismissal a few weeks later. That was how men like Finch operated. She was typing when a shadow fell over her. She looked up. It was Colonel Miller. His face was still a granite mask, but his eyes were different now. They held a new, intense focus when they looked at her. "Nurse Sharma," he said. His voice was a low rumble. "Colonel," she replied, her own voice flat. She prepared herself for a threat, or a warning, or a demand for a report. He was silent for a moment, simply studying her. "I was in the observation gallery," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Anya said nothing. She just met his gaze. "That was impressive work," he continued, the words seeming to cost him some effort. Men like him did not give compliments easily. "Thank you." The thanks was heavier than the two simple words implied. It was an acknowledgement. He had seen everything. He had seen Finch's failure and her success. A glimmer of hope, faint and fragile, sparked within her. Maybe she wouldn't be completely buried. "I was just doing my job, Colonel," she said, falling back on the practiced, self-effacing script. Miller's lips thinned into what might have been a smile on a different man. "Your job," he repeated, the words freighted with meaning. "Right." He paused. "The general is stable. He's still intubated, but his vitals are strong. You saved his life." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Dr. Finch is briefing the board chairman right now," he said, his back still to her. "He's telling them a very interesting story." He walked away without another word, leaving Anya with the cold certainty that the fight was far from over. 2 days passed, 2 days of agonizing suspended quiet. Anya worked her shifts, moving through the hospital like a phantom. The story of what happened in OR 3 had spread through the staff in hushed, fragmented whispers. She was treated with a new mixture of awe and fear. Nurses would fall silent when she entered a room. Residents who once ignored her now avoided her gaze. She was a pariah, a hero, a problem. No one was sure which. Finch, meanwhile, was more visible than ever. He strode the halls with a renewed swagger, accepting congratulations from colleagues who only knew the official version of the story. He completely ignored Anya, looking through her as if she were made of glass. The formal reprimand appeared in her file, a carefully worded document accusing her of unprofessional conduct and endangering a patient by deviating from established protocols. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic assassination, signed by Finch and co-signed by the hospital's risk management officer. Her career at Metropolitan General was effectively over. It was only a matter of time. On the 3rd day, the summons came. The general was awake, and he was asking for her. When she entered his room in the ICU, she found the scene transformed. The breathing tube was gone. General Thorne was propped up in bed, looking pale and weary, but his eyes were startlingly clear and intelligent. They tracked her the moment she stepped through the door. Colonel Miller stood at the foot of the bed, his posture as rigid as ever. 2 other men in suits, who radiated an even more potent aura of authority, stood by the window. "Nurse Sharma," the general said. His voice was raspy, weakened by the intubation, but the core of command was still there, an iron rod of will. "General," Anya replied, her voice quiet. "It's good to see you awake, sir." The "sir" was reflexive, a ghost from her past she hadn't realized was still so close to the surface. The general's eyes sharpened at the honorific. A flicker of a smile touched his lips. He ignored the pain, the discomfort, the indignity of his situation, and focused on her with the intensity of a master strategist studying a map. "Colonel Miller tells me I owe you my life," he said. "The whole team worked hard to save you, sir," she deflected, sticking to the safe institutional script. "The team," he mused, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, I'm sure they did." He shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at the sutures in his chest. "I have a question for you, nurse. A technical one. Colonel Miller said the repair on my aorta was unorthodox. He said it looked like a specific kind of stitch. Anya's heart began to beat a little faster. This was it, the moment of truth. The general locked his eyes on hers. The room was utterly still, the only sound the gentle beep of the monitor. "Did you use a sandpiper's stitch on that shunt?" It was the question. The code. A term that existed in no medical journal, a piece of classified tradecraft known only to the elite medics of the special operations community and the generals they were tasked with keeping alive. It was a password, a key to a secret kingdom, an underground railroad of courage. Anya took a breath. The camouflage was gone. The quiet nurse persona dissolved, burned away by that single coded question. She stood a little straighter. The part of her that she had kept hidden for so long, the part that was forged in discipline and fire, came to the surface. She met his gaze without flinching. It was the only option to maintain distal perfusion and prevent systemic collapse, sir. The countersign, the correct response, confirmation received. A slow, genuine smile spread across General Thorne's face. It was a smile of profound validation and recognition. He was not looking at a nurse. He was looking at one of his own, a fellow warrior. "I knew it," he whispered, more to himself than to her. He looked past her, at Colonel Miller. "I told you, you can always tell. It's in the eyes." He looked back at Anya. "What was your unit, soldier?" "7th Special Forces Group, sir," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Medical Sergeant, 18 Delta." The two men by the window exchanged a look. One of them subtly nodded. The general's eyes shone with pride. "7th Group, a fine outfit. I should have known." He took a breath, a new strength flowing into his voice. "Well, Sergeant Sharma, it seems you're still in the business of pulling idiots out of the fire." He gestured weakly toward Colonel Miller. "Colonel, get me the Secretary of Defense on a secure line, and get me the chairman of this hospital's board on the other. It's time we had a talk about the standard of care in this institution." He looked at Anya, his expression grimly resolute. "And someone," he added, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, "is going to get Dr. Alistair Finch for me." The boardroom at Metropolitan General was a place of hushed power. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the hospital's board of directors like a dark mirror. Rich, somber oil paintings of past chairmen stared down from the paneled walls, silent witnesses to the corporate execution about to take place. Anya stood near the door, sampa, feeling intensely out of place in her simple nurse's uniform. She had been asked to attend, a request that was phrased politely but carried the weight of an order. Dr. Finch sat near the head of the table, flanked by the hospital's chief legal counsel. He looked confident, almost smug. He believed this was his stage, his chance to finalize the narrative he had so carefully constructed. He thought this meeting was about her. The chairman of the board, a portly man named Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We are here to review the events of the surgery performed on General Thorne and to address a formal complaint of unprofessional conduct filed by Dr. Finch against Nurse Anya Sharma." Finch sat up straighter, adjusting his tie. He was ready to perform. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. As you know, the general's surgery presented an unforeseen complication of a magnitude rarely seen. It was a high-pressure situation, and while the ultimate outcome was a success, a testament to the skill of my team, I was deeply concerned by the reckless and insubordinate actions of Nurse Sharma. She panicked, overstepped her authority, and frankly, her wild improvisations could have easily killed the patient. It was only by my steady guidance that we were able to bring the situation back under control." He delivered the lies with a smooth, practiced sincerity. Several board members nodded, their faces etched with concern. They were predisposed to believe him. He was their star surgeon, a rainmaker who brought prestige and wealthy donors to the hospital. Anya was a nobody. "Nurse Sharma," the chairman said, his tone disapproving, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Before Anya could speak, the double doors at the end of the boardroom opened. Colonel Miller entered, followed by two stern-faced men in dark suits. They moved with a silent, intimidating efficiency. One of them carried a hardened laptop and a projector. "Apologies for the interruption, Mr. Henderson," Colonel Miller said, his voice calm but brooking no argument. "General Thorne would like to join the meeting." Finch's confident expression faltered. He hadn't expected the general to be involved directly. The men quickly set up the projector. An image flickered to life on the large screen at the end of the room. General Thorne, sitting up in his hospital bed. He was wearing a simple gown, but his presence filled the screen, his gaze sharp and commanding. "Good morning, gentlemen," the general's voice, tinny through the speakers, echoed in the silent room. "I understand you're discussing my recent brush with death. I thought I might offer a first-hand perspective." Henderson stammered. Of course, General, we are honored, and relieved to see you looking so well." "I feel like I've been run over by a truck," the general stated flatly. "A truck driven by gross incompetence." He stared directly at the camera, and it felt as if he were staring into Finch's soul. "Dr. Finch, I've read your report. It's a work of fiction worthy of a prize." Finch paled. "General, with all due respect, you were unconscious. I was there." "You were there," the general interrupted, his voice like steel. "And you were about to let me die on that table. Colonel, play the video." Colonel Miller nodded to his man. The image on the screen changed. It was now a high-angle, full-color video feed, the feed from the OR observation camera. The audio was crystal clear. The board watched in stunned silence as the entire surgery played out. They saw Finch's arrogant dismissal of Anya's warning in the pre-op briefing. They heard him call her concerns digital noise. They watched him proceed with the surgery, confident and showboating. Then they saw the moment of crisis, the flatline, Finch's panic. They heard his shrill, useless orders. They saw him freeze, defeated, and utter the words, "Time of death." A wave of shock rippled through the boardroom. Henderson's face was ashen. The video continued. It showed Anya taking command, her voice crisp and authoritative, her hands moving with impossible speed and precision. The board watched, mesmerized, as she single-handedly pulled the general back from the dead. They saw the awe and relief on the faces of the entire surgical team. And they saw Finch, cowering against the wall, a portrait of pathetic, impotent rage. The video ended with Anya stepping back from the table and saying, "He's stable. You can close, doctor." The screen went blank. The silence in the room was absolute, profound, and damning. Finch was shaking, his face slick with sweat. "That video, it's been edited. It's misleading. It doesn't show." "It shows the truth, doctor," the general's voice boomed from the speakers. "It shows you failed, and Sergeant Sharma saved you." He let the term sergeant hang in the air. "What you saw her perform," the general continued, his voice now cold and clinical, "is one of the most difficult and high-risk damage control procedures in modern medicine. It's a technique we developed for our most elite Special Forces medics to use on the battlefield. The fact that she could perform it flawlessly, under those conditions, in a civilian hospital, is not just remarkable. It is a miracle." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And now, let's talk about why it was necessary. My injury was not from some random accident. I was wounded during a Department of Defense sting operation, an operation investigating a theft and resale ring for military-grade medical supplies, a ring that was being run out of this very hospital." Finch looked as if he had been punched in the gut. "We have been tracking you for 6 months, Dr. Finch," the general said, his voice dripping with contempt. "We have records of you selling military surplus hemostatic agents and advanced surgical kits on the black market. The shrapnel that was pulled from my chest? It came from a diversionary explosive set by one of your criminal associates who was trying to destroy evidence. Your incompetence nearly killed the lead investigator of the case against you." Finch made a small, strangled sound. He half rose from his chair, his eyes darting toward the door. As if on cue, the boardroom doors opened again. This time it was not hospital security. It was 2 uniformed military police officers. They walked directly to Finch. "Dr. Alistair Finch," one of them said, his voice devoid of emotion, "you are under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy, fraud against the United States government, and accessory to assault on a federal officer." Finch crumbled. The arrogant surgeon, the king of the operating room, simply deflated. The officers cuffed his hands behind his back and led him from the room, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap and ill-fitting. The The public downfall was total, swift, and brutal. The room was silent again, the board members staring at the empty chair. The general's image was still on the screen. He now turned his attention to Anya, who had watched the entire scene unfold with a quiet, detached intensity. "Sergeant Sharma," he said, his voice softening, "your country is in your debt again." He looked back at the stunned board members. The Department of Defense has been planning a new initiative, a joint program to create a national network of trauma centers, integrating advanced battlefield medical techniques into civilian practice. We need someone to lead it, someone who understands both worlds, someone with unimpeachable skill and courage. He looked back at Anya. The position comes with a direct commission as a major in the Army Medical Corps and full authority to build the program as you see fit. We'd like you to be its first director. Anya was speechless. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a restoration, a validation of every part of her, the quiet nurse and the battlefield medic. It was a chance to build something, to save more lives, to have her skills recognized and utilized at the highest level. She looked at the faces of the board members, at the empty chair where Finch had sat, and then at the powerful, steady gaze of the general on the screen. A small, tired smile touched her lips. "I accept, sir," she said. "When do I start?" The view from her new office was vast and commanding. From the 27th floor of the federal building, the city spread out below her, a sprawling map of concrete and glass. The distant wail of a siren was a faint, almost musical note. The chaos of the street seemed a world away. Here, in the quiet, climate-controlled air, there was a sense of peace, of order. Anya stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a mug of coffee warming her hands. She was not wearing scrubs. She wore a perfectly tailored dark blue suit, the uniform of her new role. On the large oak desk behind her, next to a sleek encrypted laptop, sat a small, discreet block of wood. Mounted on it was the insignia of a major in the United States Army Medical Corps. It had been 3 months since the chaotic day in the operating room. 3 months since the public fall of Alistair Finch and her own unexpected rise. The transition had been a whirlwind of paperwork, security briefings, and meetings with people whose names she had previously only read in newspapers. She was no longer a ghost in the hallways of a hospital. She was Director Sharma. She felt a quiet, exhausted relief. It was the feeling she remembered from the field after a long and brutal mission was finally over. The adrenaline was gone, the hypervigilance had receded, leaving behind a clean, clear sense of purpose. The humiliation she had felt in that conference room seemed like a memory from another person's life. The fear, the desperation, they had been burned away in the crucible of the crisis, reforged into a cold, professional fury that had, in the end, won the day. She had not sought vindication, but it had come all the same. Finch was facing a litany of federal charges, his career and reputation incinerated. The hospital, humbled and desperate to avoid further scandal, had given her its full cooperation. The new program, the National Emergency Trauma Integration Initiative, was already taking shape under her leadership. She was building an army of her own, an underground railroad of courage made public, training civilian doctors and nurses in the life-saving arts of battlefield medicine. She took a sip of her coffee. It was a long way from a makeshift tent in some forgotten, war-torn corner of the world. But the mission, she realized, was fundamentally the same: to stand in the breach, to hold the line against chaos and death, to do the work that needed to be done, whether anyone was watching or not. Anya Sharma, the quiet nurse, the underestimated woman, was gone. In her place stood Major Sharma, a leader forged in the twin fires of military conflict and institutional contempt. She turned from the window, her expression calm and resolute, and walked toward her desk. There was work to do. If you want to see more stories about unsung heroes getting the justice they deserve, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Your support is what makes these stories possible. Let me know in the comments below. Have you ever been in a situation where you had a hidden skill that nobody knew about? I'd love to read your story. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, which is already queued up for you on the screen.